and welcome to Aligned on AI, the podcast where we have real conversations with business leaders about what's changing in their industries and where AI will actually help. Today, I'm joined by Tom Mentink, based in the Netherlands. Tom works as an operational excellence consultant, helping organizations improve performance through continuous improvement, lean thinking, and practical change management. Tom is known for explaining complex operational improvement ideas in a simple and practical way through his training, consulting, and educational videos. In this conversation, we explore how organizations can successfully introduce new ways of working, why change initiatives often fail, how frameworks like ADKAR can help, and what all of this means for companies trying to adopt AI. So, Tom, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here. Could you start by telling us a bit about your journey and how you became involved in operational excellence and continuous improvement?
Well, wonderful, Carl. I need to take you to all my trainings. I just love the intro. This is going to get everybody on board immediately. But yeah, thanks for having me. So as you said, I'm in operational excellence or continuous improvement, all kinds of process improvement. And I do that traditionally in the manufacturing. So my background is in food science. I worked in food companies for many years, and that's also still my main clients that I have. But the concepts, they go across all industries. So I work in all kinds of manufacturing, but I also do trainings and the same type of process improvement work with hospitals a little bit, municipalities, even service providers like banks. So the concepts, they are really, really similar. It's just the technical knowledge. Well, then you need to be with food industry for me.
That's great. So, obviously, what you've been drawn to the world of lean and operational improvement, but a lot of my sort of audience, that the concept of lean might be a little bit alien to them. What in a nutshell does that mean?
Yeah, so lean is, well, it basically comes from your own body as well, right? So lean muscle is just the stuff that does the work without all the fat. So when you compare that to what you do in a business, it's also about finding those things that add value. So you've got your strength of your organization, but in any organization, there is plenty of fat around the bones and around the muscles as well. That's maybe there for, some hungry days, some rainy days sometime, but really doesn't do you much good. So identifying what's really driving value for your business, for your customers, first of all, and then focusing on that, that's the idea of lean.
Brilliant. Okay, so you mentioned a couple of organizations that you've worked with there. Give me a couple of examples maybe of how you've worked with them, and what have you learned from working with them about why improvement initiatives succeed or fail?
Yes, definitely. So as I said, I train quite broadly, but I work in companies mostly in the manufacturing. From my colleagues, I know the same stuff happens. When you go into a business and you start improving without knowing what's up, without even knowing where the value is, what is realistic to improve, what is realistic to achieve, then you're not getting anywhere. And that's because people in organizations, they know, right? They know the things that are hurting them. They know what is more or less realistic. And sometimes sad to hear that there's especially a couple of the bigger consulting agencies that sort of push a benchmark throughout a whole industry, saying, well, lines should be up 90% of the time. So your lines should also be up, not really looking at what this factory has. Or they just go in and they say, well, this half of this department is just too much. Let's start cutting costs by cutting people. If you start like that, you've lost everything. And as soon as you lose the people in an organization, when you lose that motivation, even more than just numbers, right? That business is going nowhere, because it's always that interplay of what are my colleagues doing with our machinery or processes, software, whatever you're using as like a production tool, and the people who are driving it, and they know what the business needs. Now, when you make it a success, it's got a couple of things, right? So you need to have management on board. And this is because you need to organize stuff, right? You need to have resources available. You need to be able to do an investment. You need to be able to carry a program, but you really need to go into what is making the work easier for the people doing the work. How can we actually help them deliver value to a customer? And focusing from sort of the business side on where do we spend stuff or what might not really sound or feel like value added, that is not as important as looking at the process, how you build it up, and this within sort of the lean and the improvement community. We're looking at the value stream. So how do we make value in a company? What's the processes involved in getting the value through your organization to the customer? And how can we make that work as smoothly as possible to create flow in your creation of value? Make your value stream flow through the organization. And for that, you need to make it easier for people to actually do the work.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we talk about improvements, and it generally means, especially in the context of AI, people changing the way that they work. And obviously, you touched on, the importance of this, but why should it be so difficult? Why do businesses fail at doing this? What have you seen that works and doesn't work?
Yeah, so what I have seen quite a bit is, especially when you've got a bit smaller company that grows out, there is this very interesting switch. So smaller companies, like a small family business, you have got an owner who's director, who's a specialist, who is highly motivated. And so they know their stuff. They tend to be pretty smart, at least in the area that is important for their work, right? That can be street smarts or that can be university smarts, but they know what they need to do. That's one of the reasons why they became successful in the first place. But they're also so motivated, so involved. So they see all the little things that you should be doing. They basically are very experienced, also very experienced operators and line workers. They can do that work. Then they get more into management and they sort of expect their whole organization to just pick that up. Right? So they walk through, and indeed in my case, the factory floor, but they walk through the office, the factory floor. It's like, how are you not doing this? Would be more disciplined. As soon as I hear discipline, that is such an allergy word for me. Now, don't get me wrong. Discipline is needed, right? But the idea that you can actually cause improvement or affect improvement through discipline and then sustain that and really get that as an operating principle, it's not going to work. Every person has some amount of willpower and discipline that they can put to the task. But also, with all the discipline in the world, you're not going to be performing better than what you are able to do and what your systems and your machines are able to do. So you have to build the system around the people. And the larger your organization, the more you need to get that sort of training in, standards in, take care of your people. And of course, the directors will say that they take good care of the people, but they take good care of salary, of holidays, creating a nice team, which are all super important parts, right? They will provide training, but then the whole system of how can we make sure that everybody can work here? And this includes those, those little things like clear responsibilities. Because when you are a small team, you really work together. There's very short lines of communication. And you sort of, with half a word, know what the other is doing. But the larger the team becomes, the more you sort of need to formalize what the other is doing. Not because I think we as humans don't per se like all of the formality, but the flip side of being informal is also getting it wrong from time to time. Having those minor clashes that in a group of friends are absolutely normal. But when a group gets a bit bigger, people, some of them don't really want to get into that challenge of, hey, this is your work, or I already did this, and then hear from somebody else that you weren't supposed to do it, or you should not be touching the inside of a machine as an operator. That's a technician's job. And so the technician will also say, hey, I'm not touching the product. And then the operator, I'm not touching the inside of the machine. It got burned once. That sort of happens when your organization becomes larger. And to counteract it, yes, making a good team gets pretty far, but you see that sort of limit to it, right? So when the team becomes more than a group of almost friends who work together a lot, when you really get into an operation, you need to formalize stuff, not to pin people down, but to make it clear, what is my task now in the whole team? And in fact, if you compare that with, let's say, children football teams, right? Any sport team, but football is a nice one here. If you watch those young football teams, you will see the whole 11 sort of dive on the ball, and they will all sort of run to the front of the field when the ball is at the opponent's side or all run to the back of the field. If you watch any of the professional football teams, they don't cross over to the other half of the playing field. No, they sort of have their positions and it moves a little bit, but they all have their role because they train for that. Now, does that make them less footballers, right? Less self-sufficient? No, that format is giving them exactly what they need. So that's one of those things, is how do you get your team together and how do you work together with teams? But then, of course, you come along, Karl, and you say, let's change something, right? I've got this brilliant idea, and then we get more to your topic of today. Now I want some of those people to start working in a different way. And then you need to mold what we're doing, make it even easier, get people along.
Yeah.
Because you run into problems.
I think that football analogy is a great one that I really like. I did say at the start that you make complex ideas really simple to understand, and that's a great analogy. What you were talking about at the start there was resonated with me as well. I've come from a technical background. I started off as a landscape architect, understood over a period of time how to do the job really well. And then that takes a long time. That takes years to really get good at that. And you make a lot of mistakes along the way. And then suddenly you're in a managerial or a director type position. And especially with consultants, time is precious. Everything has to be done quickly. Every minute matters. It's a lot of pressure there. And then you forget how long it actually takes people to learn to do something really well, especially when they're having to learn multiple things or moving around from one part of the job to another, depending on what the project or the situation requires. So yeah, that really resonates actually, that maybe part of this is expectation about how long change should actually take, not only in the leader's
This is
mind.
part of the curse of knowledge as well, right?
Yeah.
The better you know anything, but the better you know your job, the more difficult it becomes to understand that for other people, this really is a thing.
Yeah.
I can totally understand that landscaping is bloody hard because I can't do it. But when you share your world with me, there's going to be a couple of tools that you think, oh, Tom, come on. How did you even think of picking up that tool on the wrong side? Or how can you think of cutting stuff or placing items in a logical side way or whatever, right? I'm probably messing up your whole sort of landscaping world here because I have no clue. But that is something that you indeed see when you've got an expert who wants to make change somewhere. They've gone through that learning journey that you also describe. And that's in fact one of the lessons I got from definitely one of my best mentors. At some point I was working on like a file for maintenance, like how do you organize maintenance and when you've got downtime and breakdowns of machines, and then you want to have some info on that. And that was a pretty complex system, a sort of a database with a lot of columns in it. And some of these columns, we don't have the info. We don't even measure this stuff. And he said, hide the column, but isn't the column needed? And no, hide the column. Okay, but what if we sort of need it later? And then he said, you know what, this consulting, quite a large consulting company who made that template and that system, they've been at it for over 40 years. They know what they're doing. The template is correct. The column is useful, but your team doesn't know that yet. So hide it, don't remove it. And when the time comes that the maintenance team at your factory is ready for it, they ask for something, you unhide this one column and they will say that you're brilliant for thinking about it. And then he said that key phrase that will always stay with me. He said, this is because you need to allow everybody to really make their own learning journey. Allow people to make a learning journey. And that has stuck with me tremendously. So I very often dumb down and simplify things, even when I know it's okay, it could be better. I do think this is an expert thing to do, to know what is allowed to leave out, right? If you just leave stuff out from the beginning, you might be pushing people sort of a wrong way that they really have to backtrack afterwards. So that is a specialist task to know which parts are not per se needed, but remove that. Let people gently grow into any new skill.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you've touched on something that also resonated with me there about having available data as well, and especially
Yes.
coming from a smaller organization, you tend to leave out a lot of this data. But actually, a lot of this data is very easy, very non-time consuming to record there. And the sooner you start recording this, maybe in line with the very basic data strategy about what you want to record, it's incredible how quickly actually you have a wealth of information at your fingertips there to use. So yeah, I can see how useful that is. We've talked about change management there, and one of the videos that I really got a lot of benefit from was when you explained the ADKAR or ADKAR model very clearly in one of those. For the uninitiated, could you walk us through the 5 elements for me?
Yes, absolutely, Carl. So the ADKAR model is sort of a way of looking at a change process. And indeed, the letters, they just all stand for a word, which is awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and then reinforcement. So they are sort of the phases you need to go through to make sure people can really adopt the change, really get that working. So when we talk awareness, it's about people need to understand that there's even a change coming, but also, very importantly, they need to understand, why are we doing? Not just what is good, but also the why, and give a little bit of time to get used to that. But also, critically, you need to have some time for feedback and for questions, and they need to be able to challenge it, to get to a sort of an understanding. So awareness of that we are changing and why we are changing, that is really about that internalization of, okay, well, a change is coming and it's probably going to be okay. And then that builds into desire. So that is a desire to help do the change, to actually be part of the change. And the important part here is any change is changing also your way of working, right? If there is a change somewhere and it doesn't affect you, then it also doesn't affect you, right? As in emotionally, you don't really care that much. But the thing with the changes is you then have to change how you behave and how you react to things. And that is super difficult. People don't like that. There's in fact this other change model that is basically the same as the grief model. So having to change your own way of working is psychologically about the same as going through very serious loss, like going through grief over losing somebody or having something really bad happen in your life. So it's important to make sure that people sort of want to be a part of it. Now, when we look at a whole organization, it's not that you're going to make everybody super desire this change. What you can also do, especially in an organization, is to identify those people that you see, oh, they really are like champions for this change. They really want to help make this happen and also will teach others. Then when we move to the K for knowledge, and that is about making sure that people get the skills. I know that it sort of sounds standard, right? Do your training, do your skills, close the skill gaps, but we should think about what's behind this. The A, by the way, the second A will also link into this, but the knowledge part, it gives people who should be working in a new way the confidence that they will not fail. And that is a super important part of getting people on board. The risk of you doing your job pretty well, being respected in your job, feeling like you've mastered things. Now there's a change in the way we work, and suddenly you can't cope with it. You're starting to make mistakes. You're no longer that expert. That is way more than not really doing the skill correctly. This, for many people, slices right into their own sense of self-worth. They used to be an expert and now sort of useless because they can't really do the job that had been such a big part of their identity before. Now, maybe I'm making it a bit too dramatic, but always be aware that these things play a big part when you're getting people to change, when you're getting a whole organization to change. And then from that knowledge, the ability to actually do it, that's the second part of it. And when we look at what is needed for people, I think that they are more or less the same, but I love that in the ADKAR model, they are split out because I see so often that it's training and then you have to do it. At least this model clearly states you've got your training, your knowledge, but make sure that people actually have the ability to do it. And ability is done through practice, through repetition. And you need to get some feedback there as well. You got the more theoretical part of the training, the knowledge, you did your learnings, but now you also need to provide options to perform the new way of working safely. So maybe this is like a training simulator, but more realistically, in most cases, it just means that we're going to start using the new way of working, and you get extra guidance, you get coaching, you're allowed to make mistakes, but let's do this new way of working in a safe environment. And you also, as the one who's sort of in the project for doing the change, you have to provide a lot of support at that moment, both to those people who are trying it, but also on the system side, because you're going to walk into things like we discussed, that curse of knowledge, that you can probably work with a new piece of software, a new machinery, a new whatever, and you hadn't even really thought about some of the error cases that would pop up along the way. Now, you roll it out to a broader group of colleagues or a client, in my case, if like I'm a consultant, so I often do that with a group of people at my client company, and some of them, they find new ways to mess stuff up. And that's not their fault. It was in the system. But that means we need to also help with the system, get that going. And then the last one, the R, that is about reinforcement. So it's important that we make sure we keep monitoring what we're doing, what the results are, but also super important, we keep giving the feedback to the people, positive and negative, right? We're quite good at giving the negative feedback. Hey, Joe, you were supposed to be using our new SAP Studio and you're still not, or you need to, well, in your field, how can you still not use our AI tool? Go and do that. But the positive parts as well. Joe, I've seen that you have actually logged your first completely correct request. Hey, Joe, you know that you were the one who put in the most tickets last week. Stuff like that. The positive reinforcement showing that stuff is going right. And now at some point this has to stop. This is where situational leadership comes into play. In the beginning, you coach and you really promote the feeling of, hey, you're doing a great job for trying. This is when you're more in that conscious incompetence to conscious competence. At some point when people, they know how to work with it. If somebody would, bit of an Excel nerd, but if somebody is going to tell me, oh, wow, you can use the sum function in Excel, yeah, come on. So at some point you need to stop giving the compliments, but that's later than most people do.
Yeah, no, I can understand that as well. And I think what you touched on there about the knowledge aspect as well, again, I think it links into what I was saying earlier about the timescales involved. When you've been working in a certain way, for so long, years, you free up so much mental capacity to do important new things, creative things that, because, all the semi-automated sort of processes that are going on in your head just happen without you having to think too deeply. You've come across all the errors, you've come across all the idiosyncrasies of the system, and you work them out. You don't have to think hard. Then suddenly things change. They change a lot. You could even change company and just do the same thing in a completely different way. Your mental capacity has suddenly been reduced because you're having to learn the basic things again just to make them second nature. And then, you can't do the job as well as you did before. And there is that psychological effect on you. You've lost that feeling of being able to do your job really, really well. So yeah, I can see allowances need to be made for just getting back into that steady state again, where you can just really perform to your maximum, as you're implementing change, and hopefully not too much change in one go as well.
It depends, Karl. If the change is super positive, most people don't object. One of the most life-changing things that can happen, they also do go wrong quite often, but winning a lottery. There's not many people who really object to that life change of suddenly getting a couple 100,000 or $1 million. And then maybe they can't cope with it financially. It goes wrong a bit later. But that initial change is super celebrated. And also, for a couple of years, it's definitely celebrated. So change is not per se the thing. having to change your ways of behaving, your habits,
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
where it hurts.
Yeah. And it definitely takes time to get used to it. Even if you're on board already, even if you say, yeah, I'm fully on board with this, I've got to learn it, it still takes time to get good at it, shall we say, and isn't always allowed for. I guess you've implemented or helped implement this change in some organizations. So do you see some of the stages missed out by businesses? Is it easy to recognize when one of the stages has been under implemented? Have you seen this happen?
In hindsight, it's often easy to sort of see the stages not having gotten enough attention. This is very tricky to see during a project,
Yeah.
although a clear red flag is when people don't literally talk about it, then it's almost guaranteed that you're going to be under communicating, spending time on taking everybody along. Here we get into sort of that example of the like that director of a small company who used to be the expert themselves. If you at the top with your management team have been discussing a new way of working, if you've got a new software package or any new administration thing, you've been talking about it a lot already. You've probably piloted it a bit. You've gotten some more training. You've gotten pretty much the best guidance and coaching you can get, because with your small team, the few experts you have were sort of giving you 100% attention when you were learning. Now roll that out over 100 or so people. If you go from a 5-man management team to 100 people, shop floor, it's at least a factor 20 that you're going to be diluting anything that you're doing. But also, because the management team is already on board, they are being cursed by their own knowledge and think, we've communicated this 5 times now, not really realizing that they have been prepping that project already when they put it on the budget, and then somebody sort of explained what it is, and then a couple months later, finally, it started a bit, but finally started a bit, you've already had 3 or 4 contacts with the concept over a large period of time,
Yeah.
right? And then you expect that you can take the masses along with you in 2 transformation workshops or a couple of weeks of communication. So that part is super difficult. I do think that when you sort of implement a new way of working, I know you're working a lot with sort of using the power of AI as a general way to improve your business. That, I think, use the ADKAR model. If we're talking a really specific tool, which can also be one specific AI workflow or a specific software for a couple of use cases. The one I often use as an example is sort of Oracle implementation, right? So any department in a large company knows this concept of, at some point, the enterprise management software, enterprise resource planning, and that system. That layer gets changed. That really is a tool. It's a very large and broad tool, but that really is a tool to sort of change one way of working. And for the finance department, a lot of ways of working. And ADKAR helps, but for me, it's also, in that video you referenced by me, you get that picture as well, the 4 puzzle pieces for change. And those are like, you need to give attention to all 4. They are training and skills. And this is, again, about people being able to do it. They are the systems and the tools. And this is the part I sort of miss in the ADKAR system, is it focuses a lot about somebody's ability to do it, and then a little bit of reinforcement at the end as well. Skill, the tools around it, can be a software package, can be an organizational thing, like is there even a helpline, or all kinds of systems around it. We've got the understanding component, which is very early on in ADKAR as well. So why do I even need to do this? And I am a strong believer in that. You don't have to ask what's in it for me. Many people in companies are pretty fine with what's in it for the company. I don't know what's in it for my colleagues. Even when we take that SAP or Oracle example, production people tend to really hate that implementation, but they sort of know, okay, the finance department gets a good benefit out of this. It's fine. We'll go along. So, but at least you need to understand that it has a benefit, and where is the benefit, and why would you do it? And then there is the leadership side of things. So this also comes down to reinforcement, but it sort of does the whole example part. And you've got your formal and informal leaders showing that it's important, also reinforcing that it's important. And you got your own colleagues also, well, you see them use it as well. When you are in especially like a bit of shift work or so, that where you have sort of these autonomous units working in any organization, but in factories, you see it a lot, but also in all kinds of crews that go out somewhere, like build crews that have maybe 4 to 10 people, so they do something somewhere away from the main office, and then they come back to another project. Those type of groups, they have a very strong direct peer culture. Now, if you are the one person in that group who immediately goes with management's latest fad, then the rest of the group will also say, hey, Tom, tone down a bit. You're making us look bad. And also, you're that sort of weak stick walking behind management again. Like, so the negative peer reinforcement is very real. So you need to tackle that. And when you get the 4 puzzle pieces, and it tends to work better when you have one real thing you want to change, always think about, did I make sure that people can do their job? Were they trained and did they practice? They can do their job. They have all the tools that they need, both the physical tools, the machinery, but also the systems that support when stuff goes wrong, but even to support making it run well, that they understand they want to do this change, or to at least expend the energy, right? Because the changing, it costs the energy. Expand that to be part of the change, and that they see it around them, that they see people that they respect, informal leaders advocating it, that they see colleagues who are making the effort be rewarded, but that they also see colleagues who are sort of kicking the can to not be rewarded or even slightly punished for that, so that there is this consistency, the social consistency. All of those 4 need to be in place at least. So all of those 4 should be as strong as you can, but they should be in place so that they do not become an excuse to not want to change, to revert back to the old system. And for that, you sort of have to look at those 4 puzzle pieces and ask yourself, is that part of the puzzle better than for the previous system? Did we train people that well that most can actually use this new system better than they could the old system? There's always a couple of people who just are complete masters at the old system, but the masses, actually, they might be better at the new system. The new system is easier to use than the old system. It's clear why this belief the old system is going to trump, the new system is going to trump the old system, at least for somebody in the organization. Well, leadership doesn't really compare to the old system, but it just must be present, right? It must be consistent. And that thing, it happens a bit less with ADKAR, right? That's more, how do you change a group through time?
Yes, I think it's a good compliment, isn't it, to ADKAR, the way you presented it as well. I mean, I think ADKAR gives it quite a sequential sort of look or approach to it. Not the easiest abbreviations to remember or acronym to remember, but the puzzle pieces is, I think you sort of recommended really that it be there all the time. It's a visual, have it there, ever presence in your mind to remind yourself, are all these things happening? So I will put those visuals in as part of our podcast, because I think, it is a visual thing that you've sort of provided there. So that's great. Just moving on a little bit then. So generally then, for leaders who are implementing new digital tools, what's the basic advice you would give to the leaders? Is it communication early? Is it communication early and all the way through? Is it just follow the ADKAR model, or are there some basic principles that you say, do this first and foremost, and you're a long way on your way to winning?
Well, I think the first advice is to break up the tool thinking more into, what work am I actually changing? So what are the habits or the ingrained ways of working that people have to change now? And this is so with the example of SAP, which is mainly sort of a finance type of software package that has a whole bunch of specific things for people that need to happen. So for a finance department, it's going to be a lot, but they're also highly invested in getting it running. So they will move on multiple fronts. You're going to be looking at, okay, so for my planning department, right, they need to have all kinds of production orders and work orders need to go into SAP. So that's these screens, that's these menus, it's this way of thinking. That is a job. that is going to change. Don't so much talk about all of the things that SAP can do. No, what is the job that we're going to change for you? And for your production environment, well, they will be logging stuff after they've done an order, even before they can actually get an order onto the production floor. They need to get the info and then offloading it after they've done it back into the software package. That is a different job, right? They are linked, of course, what planning and production do, but the teams need to learn different jobs, need to learn different workflows. So breaking it up like that, and that is, I think, when we get to sort of your side of things, like start using AI is way too broad. Start using AI is not a workflow. I use AI for specific things that I do, and then I try to learn that, and I get frustrated by it quite often, but then I remind myself there was a reason why I want to learn this, because it should make stuff better. But I break it up into a workflow, and taking that approach is super important. So whenever you have more of a sort of a cultural almost statement by often upper management in large companies who say, we are going to be using AI, or we are going to be feeding forward. That's a nice management coaching term. Like, okay, but what's the workflow, right? What are we going to do? And that is the very first thing to do. Break it up and then treat each of the workflows as a change program.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think I've spoken to some other sort of business leaders in this area as well, and we're all coming to the same conclusion, really, that you've got to understand your workflows in the first place. You've got to understand your processes well to understand really where you're going to enact the changes and the improvements as well. So that really resonates as well. I mean, you might not know much about AI. It sounds like you've been using tools where you can yourself, but can you see, looking ahead, whether AI will change the way organizations manage operations and improvement, or is this a very human thing?
I think we will see quite a lot of change from AI. Now, I'm not sure if it will sort of completely change the way stuff works in general, but to me, I sort of compare it to an industrial revolution or a computer revolution. When you think of the things we do with computers, especially in the early years of computers, were all stuff that we were already doing. So I actually teach in Lean, but definitely also more specific things like Six Sigma and TPM. Many of my tools, they come from before the computer era, because it's the thinking method that still works. I've also learned how to do a whole bunch of calculations of standard deviations and what have you by hand, from getting averages, and do that with a data set of 30 or so, and it's fine. Do that with a data set of 2,000, please, not me, right? So that's one of those things that comes in. The concept of, I want to know where my process is moving, I have some data on it, and we have it in a register of small physical cards. At some point, I've unfortunately never used them myself, but there's a sort of a strange punch card system where you can do an entire, almost like a Wikipedia thing or so, but there's little different sized holes in the sides of the cards. And then when you put large metal pins on a sort of a sliding plate, you can select specific things from a database by pushing the pins through, and when they stop, you need to eject the card. It's like, wow, right? But this is what all kinds of search filters in a computerized database also do. So the computer just made that difficult metals on paper system, made it into a millisecond operation over very large amounts of data. I see AI doing basically that same thing, but on a much grander scale, because you don't really need to. So in that old metal system, you had to know which of those pins to put into the slots, but that also means you had to know which slots to put into those paper cards. When you now look at SharePoint libraries, that already was a change, right? So we had folder structure with naming conventions. Then we went to sort of a SharePoint environment where you can put tags onto files. Well, that too, right? You have to think about which tags am I going to put on there? There's still organization stuff around. Now with much more adaptable language models, they can sort of filter that out. You don't really need to put the tags on. Will putting tags on make it more efficient? Well, at the moment, definitely yes. But that might actually be going away, right? So when the way of understanding languages and the way of working with sort of unstructured data like AI language models do very well, when that improves, then we can probably get way quicker answers and tie much more information together than we can do now. So I'm really thinking in my field where we often do something like a root cause analysis, we want to investigate a problem. Tends to be a lot of data. Maintenance departments and production and quality departments, they have logged all kinds of previous events, but those keywords, those tags, the organization of that, it's generally very poor. If we can have AI quickly filter through those things, it makes it possible to get stuff that technically right now you already know, right? I would have liked, for any problem that I'm investigating, I would have liked the records of previous times that this happened. It's almost impossible to get this with traditional filtering. I think AI is going to make a couple of very big steps to make that sort of organic filtering happen. But that's more on the language side of things. I use it for image generation quite a bit as well. So what I see there is, yes, the AI can also think along with me more on the creative side of what should be on the image, but I see that I keep very strong control over that, because it's just, it doesn't really get my reasoning and sort of the way, as you said at the beginning, right? I try to make complex things simple. That requires a certain human knack of, maybe this is a good example. But then as soon as I have the concept, and maybe I used AI to sort of trigger me, to give me some prompts. But as soon as I know what I want, then it can generate stuff for me. That I am not that good a painter, right? You've seen my work on the flip chart. I can draw stick figures, and that is a skill by itself. I'm not a painter, but AI can paint for me. I also know the AI large data set, sort of machine learning on data much more than on language. Well, I often see that being sort of used or misused for what is in fact just a multivariate correlation. So statisticians have been doing that for years, from before the computer era, right? But then it's a lot of work. The computers made that easier. AI can set those things up without you teaching it the whole system behind it. And because that's very important for any kind of statistics, is that you know what the process is and that you sort of ask relevant questions only. Now, at this moment, the quality of the AI tools is definitely still that you need to ask it the right question. I think that will change. So I don't know if it will ever be, but within the next 10, 20 years will be good enough to really distill the questions out of, here's my organization and my problem. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but it makes that bar much lower. So you will see many more people like me with my non-existing painting skills who can do that sort of physical expression of my idea, or me with, please don't give me multivariate correlations to do. Back in sort of university research times, we would also give that to a special department of people who really like that stuff, but it brings down the bar. Now I can already start doing such things. So if you empower yourself with these AI skills that can do pretty complex work that either would cost you a lot of time or it has very specific skills, but you keep the control of what's the goal, right? What are you trying to do? And then it can be really strong. So I see it happen definitely a lot. Now, we have been talking about how slow is change. I also am pretty handy with Excel, and I often come to companies where I think, guys, you're in the finance department. How are you not friends with the biggest spreadsheet program there is? Because they're building things. But also colleagues of mine that just, they say that they're in data analytics, but come on. Many of them are very good at it. There's also people really not coming along that trip. So I do not expect everybody to become good AI prompters or good users of it. And I also think that and will to so that the desire to put everybody on heavy AI use, why, right? Let it sort of happen like the whole computer revolution where many people use it nowadays, but with very varying levels of skill. And where we also had a slow adoption, but for those who adopt it quickly in certain sectors, it's gonna seriously boost your productivity. It's also in many sectors going to be a plaything that is gonna ruin in the end your productivity until you actually understand what it does. And that's logical, right? You have to sort of test things out.
There is a lot of parallels there, aren't there, with the internet and computer revolution there. And I think, the opportunity or the big strength of AI as we see it with the large language models is its ability to deal with a lot of data and analyze it and give you good insights. Goes back to really having a good data strategy as well. If you've got the data there available digitally, then you're going to be able to look at it in ways that you didn't even really have time to even think about looking at it for, but it will just become more natural. I think, I like using Excel a lot as well. So over the years, I've taught myself a lot of good tricks and techniques to get the most out of that. So I use it on a daily basis. But what I even find now is that AI can be really useful to help me improve my knowledge about Excel, even, if I'm struggling with some Visual Basic or even understanding the process behind something, straight away. It's not I'm not going to go down a big black hole of trying to Google it anymore. I can ask ChatGPT or whatever it might be, and it will help me resolve the problem. It's there as, in the same way that it was maybe a muse for your imagery outputs. It's you've got to prompt well in the first place to get something good out of it. But yeah, you can use it as inspiration. You can use it to prompt you to go down a certain route. It's almost there as your buddy, I think, in this sort of sense. So I think the fact that you can just talk to AI in these ways in a non-technical way, and it will hopefully respond in an equivalent sort of way, hopefully will open the door for people to not feel technically or technologically put off by the thought of AI, that actually once they start dabbling a little bit with the free tools and start getting some benefit from it and realizing it's not the scary technical thing that maybe Excel can come across as being, then there's some hope there that the adoption will be a bit more speedy. I've just got one last question that I ask everybody who comes on as a guest here, so I hope you've got one ready. But what is a one must-read book that you can recommend to me and our audience to read, and why?
There's so many books written by AIs nowadays, but let's go back a little bit. Before that, sort of on this topic, I really got a lot of good learning from the book Atomic Habits, in which it's really described how do we work as humans in our ways of working, in our little habits. And when you want to get into a new habit, tack it on to previous habits. So a habit stack. But also things like you really need to have done the habit at least, I believe in the book it says 21 times or so. So a daily habit at least for 3 weeks, stuff like that, right? So it tells you so much about changing habits, and it gives a couple of really good tricks and insights how you can make it easier. Well, the book is sort of how you can make it easier for yourself, but that of course translates immediately into how you can make it easier for others to come along with changing a way of working, changing a habit. So Atomic Habits, really nice book.
Atomic Habits. Habit stack. I love that. That's a catchy phrase. That will stick with me. So Tom, thank you so much for sharing your journey and practical experiences today, and enjoyed watching your educational videos. So I do encourage others to seek out Tom on YouTube. Pleasure having you as a guest on the podcast. So thank you for joining me, Tom.
Wonderful for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode too, please follow Aligned Minds AI on LinkedIn for practical tips and updates on future episodes of Aligned on AI. I will share today's podcast and guest on LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. But please do give me a follow on LinkedIn for more content like this. Thanks for listening or viewing, and we'll see you next time.